bless everything we do and say now, and in your name we pray. Amen. So let's start with where we left off from last week, and I believe that is day number 3, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 9. And let's start by reading that, and then we'll go from there. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together onto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. So, Genesis chapter 1, verse 9, this starts day number 3, and here's where the earth takes form. Essentially what happened here was God created the low spots and the high spots of planet Earth, and the water drained down into the low spots and formed the oceans and the seas. Now, when God originally created Earth and the world, I guess you'd say, there was land. It was just all covered with water. That's why we saw that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. There wasn't any dry land. And obviously, when we apply our Patrick Hayes Bible eschatology, it says, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together under one place, and let the dry land appear. So the fact is, the dry land appeared. So that means that the dry land appeared. Prior to this verse, we weren't able to see the dry land. Make sense? Okay. So, moving on to Genesis chapter 1, verses 10 through 13. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed," and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. Okay, now, I want to bring something up that we actually talked about a couple weeks ago, but I did not mention it since we've been recording, or I think, LaRonda, I don't think I mentioned it last week. We read in the very beginning of verse 10, "And God called the dry land earth." We look at the 9 planets, we see that God named the dry land earth. We live on planet Earth. Out of the 9 planets that we have, you can remember them through, I think it's called a mnemonic device, but that might be wrong. You can remember, "My very extravagant mother just served us 9 pancakes." And with that, you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, I don't remember how to spell that one, Neptune,
Which
and
one is not a planet anymore that they declared wasn't a planet?
Pluto.
Pluto?
Pluto apparently is no longer a planet. For me, if it was a planet when I learned about it, it's a planet today.
Planet's weird. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Give it another 50 years and
It'll be a planet.
they'll change it back. So either way, so when we talk about the 9 planets, now this is the interesting thing to notice. When you go through the 9 planets, what are all these planets named after? They are pagan gods.
Yes.
Every single planet except Earth. Why is Earth not named after a pagan god? Because who named Earth?
God.
God named Earth. Earth is the only planet out of all of them that is not named after a pagan god. Little things like that that help show us or prove to us that yes, God wrote the Bible, and there's something special about Earth that none of the other planets have. So, okay, so Genesis chapter 1, verses 10 through 13, essentially that's day number 3, and what does God create on day number 3? All of the plant life. I'm sure we could figure out a way to go into that in more detail, but it didn't seem that exciting. Now, in Genesis verse 14 we read, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so." Now, in verse 14, several very important things were placed up in the sky, and they affect the world from the point of creation up until now. So I'd like to put forth a theory that is, in the least, very interesting, and I'm certainly not convinced that the idea is true. However, I think there are too many convincing points not to mention this. So the theory that we're going to go over is called the gospel in the stars. Now, this obviously is not specifically from Scripture, but you're going to see when we read about this, we see that God created the stars in verse 16 of Genesis chapter 1. And more importantly, verse 15 tells us that they were for signs. God used the stars for either a reference purpose or a teaching purpose, or both. And we're going to find out that I believe God, that there's more to the stars in the sky than them just being there and being pretty. Now, the gospel in the stars theory states that the 12 constellations of the zodiac tell the gospel message. Now, I don't believe that that is specifically true, but I'm going to show you how this applies, and I'm going to define what the zodiac is and a few other things as we go through. 12 constellations of the zodiac. It starts off with Virgo. What was Virgo? Okay, Virgo was the Virgin.
Oh, virgin.
Virgo the Virgin. And the zodiac ends with Leo. And what was Leo?
The lion.
The lion. So as you can see, when we're talking about the life of Christ, obviously that works out as far as starts with Virgo the Virgin, ends with Leo the lion, Jesus coming back as the lion. We can see how those are applicable. Okay. However, when we look at some of the other constellations in the zodiac, they're not as easy, let's say, to apply to the life of Christ. Personally, I don't believe that you only need to use the 12 constellations in the zodiac. Now, right out of the gate, what makes a constellation part of the zodiac as opposed to other constellations? Because there are many other constellations in the sky. The zodiac signs, or the zodiac constellations, has the sun, the moon, and all of the planets pass through them. So that's what makes it. Now, there are other constellations that are at different places in the sky that are amazing and beautiful constellations, but they're not part of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Okay, so now, with that being said, the zodiac dates back to Babylon, and I believe specifically the zodiac is used for pagan purposes. Now, that doesn't mean that God didn't still create the stars. It just goes to show that the zodiac and the 12 symbols were specifically for pagan purposes. However, that fits in with everything we learn about in the Bible, where God makes something beautiful, and then the devil tries to corrupt and pervert that beautiful thing that God created. So, as far as the constellations, there are several that are not part of the zodiac that I think clearly are part of the story of Christ. The most famous constellation in the southern hemisphere is the Southern Cross.
Wow, I have never seen that. And
Well, and if you haven't seen that, look at an Australian flag. It's printed on it, the 4 stars. And I mean, there are 4 of the brightest stars in the southern.
Can we see it from, like, here?
Nope, you have to be south of the border. Well, not even south of the border, south of the equator.
Yeah.
And if you're south, and in the same way, the people south of the equator never get to see Orion.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry, that's not true. Orion shares both hemispheres. They never get to see the Big and the Little Dipper, which both are not constellations. The Big Dipper is an asterism. It's part of a constellation, the Bear, Ursa Major. Anyway. Okay, so anyway, the Southern Cross. So the Southern Cross, there are, like I said, 4 of the brighter stars in the Southern Hemisphere. You can see it on the Australian flag, and it's obviously pertinent to the life of Christ, a giant cross. Now, I read an article written by a fellow named John Pratt, who holds a PhD in modern astronomy. From this point forward, I'll be quoting from this article that he wrote. He says that Albumazar, an Arab astronomer of about 850 AD, describe the 48 original constellations listed in the 12 groups of 4 in order, progressing around the zodiac. The zodiac is a set of 12 constellations through which the sun, moon, and planets all appear to move. Each of those 12 is associated with 3 other nearby constellations, thus the 12 zodiac constellations and their 36 associates make up the number and well-ordered set of 48 constellations. So as you can see, there are many, many constellations, 12 of which are in the zodiac. In about 150 AD, the Greek astronomer Ptolemy not only listed 48 constellations, he also measured the exact positions in the sky of every star in each constellation, noting just where it fit into the figure. Our modern constellations are virtually identical to Ptolemy, with another 40 added to cover the entire sky, bringing the modern total to 88 constellations. How does our set of Greek constellations from Ptolemy compare to the Persian list of Albumazar? It turns out they mostly agree on 45 of the constellations, but disagree on 3. One mentioned by Albumazar is entirely missing and had apparently been lost since before the time of the ancient Greeks. So there is a constellation that used to be current on all charts that is now no longer showing up on any constellation charts. Albumazar gives us a lot of detail about the constellation, including its location, what the figure looked like, and even what it represented. Let's see. Okay, the location. First, we know the location because it was the first constellation associated with Virgo, the Virgin. That means that it would have been above the head of Virgo, the first part of the zodiac constellation. Now, what constellation was at that position on the Greek map? A pure and immaculate virgin holding in the hand 2 ears of corn, sitting on a throne, nourishing an infant in the act of feeding him, who has a Hebrew name, Isu, which we in the Greek call Christ. So, the one constellation that was missing is associated with Virgo. It happens to be a boy that Virgo is holding, whose Greek name we would call Christ. And this is missing from many charts. Okay, now that quote sounded too good to be true to me, and I continue to quote. So I decided to check it out. I found a Latin translation of Albumazar's work, of which I reproduce a paragraph in question. The way that the constellation looks, and 7 stars are the minimum requirement for a constellation. So the bottom 4 stars make almost a perfect square. So comparing the actual stars to the Egyptian figure at Dendra shows an excellent fit. The woman is seated on a very square throne and the bottom stars indeed form a square. Not shown are several slightly dimmer stars in the throne, which makes it glitter. The queen is holding an infant. If this restoration is correct, it represents the first time in over 2,500 years that it has been known to the Western world. It might be very interesting to discover just how this plain and precious constellation, which so clearly testifies that Jesus Christ was somehow erased from the maps of the heavens. It is very fortunate that enough clues remain for it now to be restored to its proper place. And that is a picture of the constellation. See, so it is part of Virgo the Virgin.
Yeah.
Or associated with it as far as being right there.
Crazy.
Yeah.
The stars, but
All the stars are there.
Well,
They've
they're
always
talking.
been there. It was just left off of charts.
Yeah.
And it wasn't drawn
Man's
as far
just trying
as
to ignore
Yeah, okay,
it.
that
its
totally makes
existence,
sense.
because then it proves
Yep.
it gives more.
there's more proof that there is a God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and that the stars are not just randomly placed there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
as I said,
Wow.
I don't believe that the gospel in the stars theory, that is as straightforward as look at the zodiac and it points out the life of Christ. However, I do believe that several of the constellations in the zodiac, along with several constellations that are not in the zodiac, like the Southern Cross and some other constellations, clearly are able to tell a story. Now, follow me here. In the beginning, God created, and we're going to read about it, next week. God created man and woman, Adam and Eve, and then Adam and Eve started to have kids. there was no Bible to reference in the beginning. God couldn't say, turn to this
Right.
page, Adam, and this is what's going on, because the Bible hadn't been written yet. Now we know that God walked with Adam in the cool of the evening in the garden. It tells us that. So God clearly spent a lot of time with Adam and Eve, and he taught them a lot of things. But he didn't have a book to reference, so what I believe is that God wrote out all the different stories of what was going to happen, and he did it in the stars. And he was able to show Adam, look right here, see this constellation, he could draw it in the dirt, you know, and say, see this right here, this represents this is a picture, this is what's going to happen, then this, then this. So God was still able to give Adam something that he could use and that he could teach him off of until the written Bible came about, or at least the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, which was after Moses. Moses compiled and wrote the first 5 books. Okay, so continuing on with just a little bit, and Psalm 19 verse 1, I believe it says, the heavens declared the glory of God. And yeah, it sounds right. Forgive me if that's not it. I didn't write it down. But as you can see, with the sun and the moon, we're going to see in a second, and then also with all the stars, you can see that, you know, the heavens truly do declare the glory of God. God used the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the different things in order to show us things about him. Okay, so does anyone know the name of the North Star?
I've heard you say that before.
Yeah, so Polaris is the North Star. Now, Polaris has not always been the North Star, and I'll show you why. So what you have is, you have Earth, and Earth is on its axis. I forget the actual degree at which Earth tilts, but you can see Earth is on an axis, and Earth's axis has what's called a precession, which means that Earth's axis moves so that right now is pointing at Polaris. But because Earth's axis has a precession, which means it's constantly changing, that means that Polaris has not always been the North Star. So roughly in this 360-degree circle that you see Earth's axis pointing at as the axis continues to move, roughly every 72 years Earth's axis moves 1 degree. Now, what that means is that the North Star that people were looking at many years ago is not the same as the North Star today. The star named Thuban was the North Star during the days of Noah through Moses. So when Moses and Noah were on Earth, they looked up and had a North Star as far as using it for navigation or whatnot. The star they were looking at was Thuban. The way that it works, if you take a camera and you point it up at the sky, and you open up the shutter so that it continually is taking a picture through the night, you'll see the North Star right there, right?
Okay.
Okay. Then what you'll see are many other stars all over the sky, filling up the night sky. Okay, so now, because you are watching a picture that is continually letting light into the camera, what you see is that because the Earth is moving, all of these stars are forming
Blurs.
a circle moving in the same direction, with one star at the center that is not moving, the North Star. So that star that's not moving is true north.
It's right where the camera's.
Exactly.
It's not going to be turned
Yeah,
different.
well, yes, and you can, it doesn't have to be dead center in the picture, no matter what, so long as the camera is not moving and you have it set looking straight up in it, and the North Star is in the picture. The North Star is the one star that doesn't move because the axis of the Earth points directly at it, so as the Earth spins, that one point stays still. Make sense? Okay, so you can see that the North Star is true north,
Okay.
different from magnetic north, and we can get into that by a little bit. But what we can see is that the Earth's axis points directly at that star. Now, if you continue to monitor that star every 72 years, the axis changes by 1 degree, and over the course of time, you see that that star is not exactly where the axis points, but it's a little bit off.
So that star will start to look like it's making
Moving,
it,
yep.
and a different star
Correct.
will start looking more.
So another star will start to look more
Wow.
like
Okay.
the North Star, like true north, and Polaris will look less like that. In the year 3000, Gamma Cephei will be the next North Star, followed by Iota Cephei in the year 52 AD, or 5200. What's neat about today is that the North Star happens to be one of the brightest stars in the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay.
Depending on what the North Star was in the past, it wasn't the brightest. Polaris, what it is today, happens to be one of the brightest stars, which makes it,
Huh.
yeah,
Easy.
really nice and convenient for us when we're
Yeah.
trying to find. Of course, the way that you find Polaris is you find the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper. So here is Polaris, okay? And this is the Little Dipper. And then the Big Dipper we actually use to find the Little Dipper. And this is obviously not to scale. This one down here is the Big Dipper. This one up here is the Little Dipper. And what you have is this star right here is Polaris. Okay, so this is the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper right here. Now if you notice, the way you find Polaris is you find the Big Dipper,
Okay.
and then through these two stars you draw a straight line,
Alright,
and
that's
it
straight.
points directly to the North Star, which is at the end of the handle of the Little Dipper.
Oh.
Completely disproportionate.
I was like,
Okay, so when you look up at the sky, it'll look a little different.
time.
But anyway, you get the idea. So that's how you find Polaris. Not to mention Polaris is one of the brightest stars in the Northern Hemisphere. So we'll get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 16. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Now, the way that it works is that the sun took the place of God in that earth no longer needed the light of God produced. Remember in the beginning, in the very first verse, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Now we find out that the earth was formed and without void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the earth, and God said, let there be light. Now, we just entered day number 4. The sun is created on day number 4. Light was created on the very first day. God said, let there be light. And we found out that that light came from God. And we read about that in Revelation. We also read about that God is called the light of the world and various things. So we know the light came from God. On day number 4, God created the sun. That took the place of God in that the sun now produced the light to shine on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. Now, the way that it works is that the sun represents God, and I'm going to draw this out so that we can see this. So the way that it works is that the sun represents God, and we, the Christian, are represented by the moon. Now, here's how it works. We have God living inside of us in the form of the Holy Spirit. The moon does not produce light, but it reflects light from the sun. All of the light, so when we are here and we are looking up at the moon looks as if it is all lit up, although there's no light. The moon has no light of its own. It doesn't produce any light. What you have is light coming from the sun that bounces off the moon, and we are able to see that. So in the same way, the moon does not produce any of its own light. We don't produce any of our own light. All we do is reflect the light of God. Okay, so we are not God, we just represent God. We as Christians, although we have God living inside of us, we do not have the power of God, in its entirety. We reflect Christ, we are not Christ, just like the sun is God and the moon is the Christian. We reflect God's power, we do not have God's power. And that's the difference that you find in, there are some forms of Christianity where they're going to teach that you actually possess a portion of the power of God and you can use that wherever and whenever you want, and that's not the case. It's that God's power can be used through us. Now, please understand that God's power can be demonstrated through us. I'm not saying that it can't. But what I'm saying is it is a limited version of a greater power. In the same way, when we see the light of the moon, that is a limited version of a much greater source of power. Okay, and I believe that's just one thing that you can use to, draw or use as an analogy for how our relationship is with God. Okay, so Genesis chapter 1, verse 17 and 18. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. The way God set up the day and the night demonstrates the Christian life. Now, when we are in a bad place and we feel like we are surrounded by darkness, there is always some amount of light there. When, obviously, okay, so let's say this is the earth, and we are here. Obviously, it is nighttime until the earth spins around and we can see the light. Now, during the nighttime, we feel like we're surrounded by darkness, but you got to remember there's always some amount of light, whether it be light reflecting off of the moon, or if the moon has moved around to the other side of the earth so that we cannot see it, there is still a little bit of light from the stars. And that's something that God shows us, that no matter how dark of a time we are in, there's still some light there. God's showing us that He's still there in some way. Also, there is a limit to the darkness. It will begin to fade and the light will appear. So much light, in fact, that you will forget the darkness ever existed, and you will be in so much light that you can't even look at it because it is too bright, to look directly at. And that is an analogy of the Christian life. And instead of a 24-hour period, through our life, we will go through very, very dark times where we feel like there's no light there whatsoever. If we look closely, we can see that there's a little bit, whether it be on the horizon, or the stars in the sky, or the moon, and one day in the Christian life, or at some time in the future when the earth spins around, the sun will start to come up and we'll be back in the light. And you hear about, there's been many songs sung about it as far as the mountaintops and the valleys. It's another analogy. But that's the idea, is that there's always going to be light again. And then, on the other side of the coin, we need to take advantage of the daytime and the light that is offered to us, because the fact is, darkness will come again. And that's the Christian life, just like the day. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. Even though we say sunrise and sunset, the sun doesn't actually move, it's the earth spinning, but we still say the sun rises. Okay, and the idea is that in the Christian life, it's the same. Whether if we're in the dark time, there's going to be light coming. You just got to hold out. And if it's in the nighttime or in the daytime, take advantage of that light, because there will be night again. Yeah. That's the way that the Christian life works. Yeah. Verse 19, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And that's Genesis 1:19. Okay. Genesis 1:20. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Okay, so on day number 5, we see several things. God created everything that flies in the air and swims in the sea. So day number 5 is the beginning of life on earth, and God creates 2 different types of life. Everything that flies seems to be labeled as fowl. Would you agree? In the beginning, God created the fowl that fly. Okay. So, The question is, included in the fowl, let's say hummingbirds. When did God create hummingbirds? What day?
The 5th.
Okay, He created them on day number 5, or I should say, did He create them on day 5? We got a yes. Okay, what about bats?
The 5th, yeah.
Okay, it seems like it would be yes, the 5th. And now people would say, well, you know, fowl means birds. Well, not in the Bible. Okay?
Right.
God labeled everything that flies in the firmament of heaven as fowl.
Right.
So, and here's the way that it works out. Carl von Linnaeus gave us our modern scientific classification system: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. That's not the way God did it. God didn't say that this is a species, and this is a family, and this is a class, and this is an animal kingdom. God said, you got things that fly. On day number 5,
This is
they're
much
fowl.
more simple.
Yeah. Okay. Do they have wings? Yes. Do they fly? Yes. Day number 5. Now,
Funny, yeah.
okay, I'll give you another one. About the ostrich.
They don't fly.
Okay, so did God create ostriches on day number 5?
No. No, I'm going to say no, because they don't fly.
Okay, I agree. I say no. Okay. Penguins?
No.
See, what you're doing, if you were to say penguins and ostrich, yes, then what you're doing is you're basing what God created based on what they looked like. God said, do they fly in the air in the open firmament? Yes, then I created them on day number 5. Do they swim in the ocean? Yes. You see? Okay, whereas an ostrich and penguins were clearly land animals. Now, that doesn't mean they can't swim. I mean, a dog can swim. I can swim, but I'm clearly a land animal. Okay? So, okay, so I'll give you another one. What about the pterodactyl?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, the pterodactyl flies, therefore God created it on day number 5. And this is where it's important. Remember, when answering questions, you have to apply the Patrick Hayes Bible, eschatology method, which is read the facts, figure out what it says plainly, state those facts, and then draw implications from those facts. So God said things with wings, that's what He created, day number 5, if they fly. Okay, so therefore, flying dinosaurs, flying mammals, okay, which we'd consider bats, flying birds, anything that flies, that's on day number 5. The important thing to notice here is that we have to remove ourselves from the philosophy that tells us that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, or that our modern scientific classification system is somehow trumps or superior to the way God set things up. Now that doesn't mean that when I was, when I took a biology class in college, I didn't use the modern classification system. That's what I used because that's how we label things. Okay, but we label a whale as what type of an animal? It's a mammal, right? Okay,
Mammal.
God labeled it a fish. It's a mammal because it produces milk and it has hair.
Right.
However, what does God call the whales?
A fish.
That's right. Okay, Jesus calls the whale the great fish, referring to the story of Jonah in the book of Matthew. And God named the whale, and He created it on day number 5 as something that swims in the water. Okay, so once again, now there's nothing wrong. Oh, is a whale a mammal? Yes. Okay, but if we're to go by God's definitions, it is a fish. Okay, let me go over one more thing, and then we'll call it a day. Go to Genesis 1, verse 24. We read, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so, and God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good." God uses the term kind 5 times in 2 verses for a reason. God wants us to know that all animals will bring forth after their kind. God uses the term kind 5 times in the first 2 verses for a reason. God wants us to know that all animals will bring forth after their kind. Now, there are lots of kinds of dogs, but you will never have a dog bring forth anything but a dog. And that's the idea, and I mean, believe it or not, it's, the Bible disproves evolution that simply. God says each animal brings forth after their own kind. Now, in the same way, there are lots of varieties of people. Okay, you have people with different color hair, different color skin, different physical attributes, but it's no different than dog kinds. You take 10 steps back and look at them all, a 10-year-old will say, well, they're still all people. Okay, they're still all dogs, they're still all cats, and dogs will always produce dogs. Now, if Charles Darwin only read and believed Genesis chapter 1, he wouldn't have come up with his theory. Because what he did was he said that, well, if you look at these birds, they produce different types of birds, and they're all slightly different, and if you give it enough time, all of a sudden that bird and that turtle that live on an island off the western side of South America, you'll see that if you go backwards in time far enough that they were related.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. Okay, birds produce birds, turtles produce turtles, and it's based on the kind. So on day number 6, God creates every creature that walks on land. Once again, this includes every variety of farm animal, every variety of game animal, every variety of dinosaur, every variety of insect. Okay, if it walks on land, this is when God created it, which was day number 5. Okay, and day number 6 is going to be when God creates man, and I think we'll wait until next week to get into that. Any questions on anything we went over?
When you say zodiac, what is, I guess I don't know what all that is.
The definition of the zodiac?
Yeah, I understand it's like...
Because the earth moves, you see the sun on the horizon. The sun rises, goes through this constellation and sets. Okay? The moon, we see, okay, goes around the planet and it passes through that constellation. You see? And then you have the same thing with, you have Saturn, okay, you have Mars. You see the point? So the zodiac is 12 specific constellations that have the sun, moon, and planets pass through them. The zodiac is a set of 12 constellations that were deemed special or significant because the other celestial bodies pass through them. So it dates back to Babylon, and the zodiac was, and anything that came from Babylon is pagan.
Right.
I mean, that's as simple as it gets. Babylon equals pagan. Okay? So it dates back to Babylon, and they used it for the purpose of astrology,
not astronomy,
which is different from astronomy. Astronomy is the study of celestial bodies, sun, moon, stars, planets. Astrology is using those celestial bodies in order to try to predict the future. So that is, the zodiac equals 12 constellations. Well, why those 12 instead of others? Because the sun, moon, stars, and planets pass through those 12 constellations.
Okay.
So that's what the zodiac is. And when you read your horoscope, it has to do with the 12 constellations.
I thought so.
Yeah,
I mean,
so like because I was born on August 25th, my sign is Virgo the Virgin. It is at the tail end of Virgo the Virgin, so I am on the cusp, which means right on the middle of the next one, Leo the Lion. So I share attributes for these two.
Yeah.
Okay, all of that has to do with astrology.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Which is very different from astronomy. There's nothing wrong with the study of the sun, moon, stars, and planets.
The zodiac itself isn't like that, it's there.
No, the zodiac just is a set of 12 constellations, period. That's it. Okay, now people use those constellations to try to look into the future and determine attributes about people. And it's like reading a cup of tea leaves or a crystal ball or anything else.
Right.
It's divination, and so that's where it gets into Babylonian paganism.
Right.
Okay, and that's the problem so many times with Christianity. It's like, okay, just because astrology exists doesn't mean stars are bad.
Yeah, if you're
there's nothing
stars,
wrong with the stars.
witchcraft.
There's nothing wrong with looking at stars. There's nothing wrong with understanding the difference between
God made the stars.
Exactly. God made the stars for us to look at. He made them for us to, appreciate for navigation. There's nothing wrong with knowing the names of constellations.